Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Phoebe, Dragos, Arne?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Welcome. Well, thank you for your time today, and thank you to everybody in the audience. We've got a great group assembled here today to talk about trends in industrial technology. So we're going to get into it in a minute. We'll do probably 25, 30 minutes of moderated panel discussion followed by audience Q&A, but I encourage anyone in the audience to just submit questions through the Q&A chat box at any time, and we'll either answer them during the panel or we'll come back to them at the end. But please feel free to keep this interactive. Let's start by introducing our panelists. I'm just going to read you off in the order that I see you on my Zoom. So Phoebe, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Absolutely. Thanks, Isaac, and thank you for NEXUS Dealmakers team. I think you guys put together a wonderful list of events and then also this panel. So my name's Phoebe Wang. I'm principal at Shell Ventures, and basically the Shell Ventures is the venture capital arm for Validate Shell. And then we look at areas all the way from power mobility to decarbonization for carbon management, carbon tracking, hydrogen, and nature-based solutions. So for myself, I've been with Shell Ventures for almost 2 years, been in the venture capital industry as a venture capitalist since 2012. Definitely went through the clean tech 1.0 and now seeing a lot of momentum under the climate tech or clean tech 2.0. And then I started my career as a engineer back in Singapore in the early 2000s. So have seen the trend of energy transition and definitely want to share a few thoughts with the panelists here. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna pass over to you, Isaac.
Excellent. Thank you, Phoebe. Up next, I got Dragos. And Dragos, I gotta say, the last time I hosted a panel in the real world, you were on it a couple years ago. So seems like a really long time ago. It's good to see you here.
Same here, and I look forward to seeing you in person again, hopefully soon.
Yeah.
I'm Dragos Maciuca. I'm the executive technical director for Ford in Palo Alto. Basically, I run the research and innovation center for Ford in Silicon Valley. I've been doing this for about 6 years now. So we're based in the Valley to look for technologies that we can bring into the automotive industry from startups. And that has really meant over the last 6 years, an explosive growth in software, autonomy, sensors, compute platforms, cybersecurity. Pretty much another easy way to explain what we're looking for is everything that's non-traditional automotive. So we're not working on engines, transmission, suspensions, or sheet metal bending. Although tangentially, we've looked at technologies that help us with the more traditional part of the company. In terms of personal journey, I started with a PhD in autonomous vehicles of all things, except 20 years ago, there was no way I was going to do a startup in the space because nobody cared. It wasn't like the boom that we see today. I then worked for BMW in Silicon Valley when car companies were just starting to come to the Valley, and when I knew everyone at that intersection of the automotive industry in Silicon Valley, which now I can't claim the same thing because there are thousands of people working in the intersection. And then I worked in the semiconductor industry, KLA Tencor, defense, Lockheed Martin, and Apple right before joining Ford. So now we're here, we're looking at startups, as I said, from Silicon Valley, but in general, we have a very global view. We have an office in Israel. We've looked at startups in Israel, but we've looked as far as New Zealand, Australia, China, Paris. So we have a very global view, but with a center of gravity in the Valley and Tel Aviv.
Excellent. Thanks, Dragos. Last up, but not least, Arne, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Isaac. So my name is Arne Stoschek. Let me put actually my introduction in the context of the NEXUS Israel conference. So in the previous position, I worked at the Israeli California startup Better Place and had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in Israel over a long time. And I really learned to appreciate the mindset of the many people in Israel I worked with. And it's maybe best summarized with a quote from Ben Gurion: in order to be a realist, you have to believe in miracles. So what the quote meant for me was to work on big fundamental opportunities that we have in the transportation industry, in particular now with the aspects of clean propulsion and autonomy technology. And so in the transportation industry, we have the opportunity to work on topics that have a massive impact on people's life. And anyway, the Ben Gurion quote meant for me that I wanted to reach high with what I'm doing as an engineer, and reaching high meant I decided to shift from working for quite some time on cars and ground-based robots to work on the fascinating topic of flight and flying things. And that's where I'm now with A-Cube. A-Cube is the innovation center of Airbus in Silicon Valley, California. And within that entity, I lead Project Wayfinder. It's a project targeting development of core AI and autonomous flight technologies, targeting the next generation of aircraft. And I started Airbus as part of what was called the Vahana effort to jumpstart the development of an electric, autonomous, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So a less geeky name for this would be an air taxi or flying car. And then I decided to broaden my role when we realized the wider applicability of the autonomous system that we were building to also large commercial aircraft. And yeah, it's really a pleasure and fun to work on the topic of autonomous flight. And that's really a transformational technology that will also enable to future-proof our industry. And I also very much appreciate the kind of the international collaboration aspect and working across many countries within the global Airbus organization. That's in a nutshell about me.
Excellent. Thanks, Arne. And so I forgot to introduce myself, actually. I know some of the folks on the line, but for those who don't know me, I'm Isaac Brown. I lead the industrial tech group here at Landmark Ventures. And so I have the pleasure of getting to hang out with people like Phoebe and Dragos and Arne when our events team puts together these awesome conferences. So thanks to everyone who's here today. As you guys went through your intros, I was kind of thinking I wanted to start with maybe a different question than was in the prompt, because I'm realizing that, well, we have three really incredible companies here, right? Super giants in their industries, represent the GDP of a small country. But we also have three companies that were all uniquely impacted by the pandemic, right? I think in very specific ways that were different from a lot of other industries. So one of the things that I think is an interesting question to ask innovation and digital leaders at companies over the past year or so is, what are, over the course of the beginning of the pandemic, what was the business asking for from you? When they came and said, oh, we have all these issues because of this situation that's happening, and you've always been looking at new technologies and innovative ways of doing things and saving money and, operational resilience, I'd be interested to hear just, maybe what was one thing that your group did as a part of the pandemic response at the company? So who wants to start with that?
I'll take that, because that question really resonated, because my CTO Ken Washington pulled me into this task force about the return to work and how do we had to get the assembly line working, right? I mean, we had no choice. So in Palo Alto, we had the luxury that we could immediately overnight work from home. It was tough. It took us a while to get things going, but how do you get the assembly line working? So he pulled me into this task force, and I'm like, I know nothing about biology. It's been, I love math and physics and all that, but biology has always been a weak link. And I'm like, no, come in. I had to dust off my statistics books and understand what the implications are of false positives and false negatives in this particular case, where the infection rate, I would say it's absolutely the worst, as in is high enough to be dangerous, but it's low enough to create a lot of false positives and to put a lot of people into a false sense of safety because they don't see people around them. So, if it was like the flu, everyone has it, you're aware that everyone has it. If it's something that happens 1 in a million, sure, you can take the risk and show up. 1%, 2%, 3%, it's in that really horrible area where you don't see the people around you, but yet people get affected. And the other role that we ended up playing is looking at all these startups that were developing tests, and how do you do a quick test, and how do you do a PCR level test, but in a few minutes. It's all the technology that, and a lot of it was actually starting to be driven by doing things on a chip, doing saliva tests, and so all these new technologies that were coming in almost overnight, and you saw some of the startups pivoting overnight from what the path they were doing, all of a sudden getting pulled into COVID testing. And I think, to a large extent, on the one hand, I'm afraid that this is just the beginning of a period of pandemics due to global warming, due to a lot of travel and all that. But at the same time, I'm optimistic that the technology has changed almost overnight, where we can react a lot faster the next time around.
Yeah, so Dragos, you went from being an engineer focused on vehicle electrification and autonomy to moonlighting as a epidemiologist, basically.
That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah, and I know that Ford early on, you were one of the very early case studies of globally rolling out distancing and exposure tracking technology within your manufacturing operations, right? Was your team involved with that selection process?
Yeah, absolutely. And we even put out a playbook that we shared with other companies, and we had even a lot of tier 1 suppliers and other companies that we could consider competitors that we shared this information with, because it's just too important not to share.
Right. No, that's great. No, thanks for sharing that, Dragos. Phoebe, Arne, what do you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So okay, Arne, feel free to jump in. But I think that Dragos actually talked a lot about how to interact, right, in terms of the daily operations, and I think that's super important. And it's also something that we have seen internally, given that you still need to have the wells drilling, right? You still need to have the operations done, and then how to do that safely, and then in a way that could minimize the impact on our colleagues and then our workforce as much as possible. So I would say that COVID or pandemic actually kind of started or accelerated the digitalization. So we have been doing digitalization, automations, and robotics in the past 2 decades, right? And then we always kind of bring those new companies or new startups back to our business units, and then, hey, this could help you kind of reduce your increase your efficiency and reduce the downside and improve that reliability. But then there's always this a backup or current existing operations. So I would say that the pandemic definitely accelerated that. And then for now, we actually also have the whole VP shift around digitalization, which is a really positive sign. And then the second part or second piece is actually kind of on top of the pandemic. We also see this climate change accelerating, right? So crude oil, for those of you who are doing trading or commodity trading, you would see that historically the crude have been trading between at least above $30 per barrel, right? If you're looking at WTI index. And then last year we were seeing a historical negative price for crude, and in my whole life, right, or in my short 20 years experience with the oil and gas industry, it's non-believable. It's definitely a historical milestone. So that on top of the pandemic, right, because people are not traveling and then you're not doing the transportation. So really make our leadership think about what is the next step, right? And so in a sense, it actually powered the transition of historically the fossil fuel provider to a overall a well-rounded energy provider. So we have looking at power, we're looking at hydrogen, and we're looking at mobility. So it has been a very, very positive change. And then the last piece, or the third one that I want to share, is about the ventures. So we are part of the corporate venture arm, and then kind of compared to a lot of financial VCs or VCs who are kind of still doing a kind of a hold in the earlier pandemic time period, right? We are actually seeing a more or an increasing demand of having the ventures team to go out and source what are the innovations, especially like the mothership is changing the direction, right? It's more and more important for us to make sure that we know what is the next trend, what are the new innovations that could help. So we actually see more activities, or you guys can like expect more activities from our ventures team. Yeah, I'm going to pause there and over to you, Arne.
Thank you, Phoebe. Well, maybe to put the COVID impact in the context of some numbers. So in 2019, the good year before, the greater hit. So the travel and tourism sector was responsible for 1 in 10 jobs globally, and about 10% contribution to the global GDP. And yeah, and in the calendar year 2020, so the air passenger traffic plunged by 66% about, and so that was the sharpest decline ever in the aviation history. And we never ever had this type of situation that people just stop flying. And yeah, you can imagine what kind of havoc this creates in an industry, employment, etc. So going forward, what are the important parts, and also how is it tied to what I'm working in? So it's it really amplifies the need for kind of contain costs to operate and have the ability to scale, but also to satisfy an ever increased desire for safety, for safe transportation. And that's the reason why my team was really asked to double down on the autonomy development as a strategic focus for Airbus going forward. The another project that we do out of this Cube Innovation Center is the rethinking of the assembly line and manufacturing. So building digital tools to readjust manufacturing plans in real time. And yeah, it's similar to, or tying into a little bit what Dragos was mentioning, the impact on manufacturing. That's also a big one. And being an optimist, I believe people will go back to traveling in time, and pretty much everyone that I talk to says, hey, I need to visit relatives, I want to fly to Hawaii, I need to go to business meetings. So I'm personally optimistic that there will be a recovery.
Yeah, I think, and I'm an optimist too. I think you're going to have a lot of people spending a lot of money on travel and retail and restaurants as soon as they can again. Well, the people who are fortunate enough to still have money to spend on those things will probably spend a lot of it. So, you know, I think I think it was interesting just because we work with a lot of corporate venture groups, innovation departments, digital groups, and I think that there's always kind of this notion of them trying to engage the business. And I think in a lot of ways a year ago that inverted to the sense where business operations came to you and said, we need your help. Like, what do you got? What do you got for us? Like, we need this, this, and this. And so I think it changed the way that those groups interact a lot. And then, you know, I don't want to spend the whole time talking just about the pandemic. So, you know, we talked about things we looked at last year. And I think that in a lot of ways, it was kind of the kick in the butt that a lot of these companies needed to go digital, to innovate, to start doing more creative things. So if you look ahead at the next few years, you know, what's one project or area or initiative that you're really excited about at the company? It could be a continuation of pandemic response. It could be something totally new. Just, you know, whatever you want to share. Who wants to jump on that one?
Yeah, I can share something like that I'm really passionate about. So like as I mentioned to Dragos, like in the kind of backstage before. So similar to him, I'm actually also like doing something that 20 years ago I wouldn't think that I would be doing. So my undergraduate is like a material science engineering with like environmental engineering as a minor. And then the reason why I picked that as a minor just because like 20 years ago, for you to find a job in Singapore as an environmentalist, it's like there's only like a handful of positions, and you would be competing with a lot of classmates. But right now, like going through the Clean Tech 1.0 in around 2012, and then now like the climate tech, we actually see a very, very uprising ESG and then momentum from like the corporate, the regulations, and then also the governments, right? So one thing that I've been like looking after for Shell Ventures is about the hydrogen investment. So if you're looking at historically, like in the past 5 to 7 years, the US, and I have this data just for the US, but I believe that this would manifest like across the world, right? So you have, if you're looking at the energy consumption by the source, so in the past 5 years, it actually never changed because if you're going to the EIA, which is the Administration for Energy Information, then you will see that for renewable power or renewable energy source, it's always like 11%. It never changed. Like it probably changed a few like basis points, but it's not like even 1% change. And then one of the key reasons when you look at renewables is it's hard for it to be on the base load. Your power generation, the base load historically is coal, and then now it's natural gas, but it won't be the wind, the hydro, or the solar, just because it's not consistent. And then the other key point is about the energy storage, right? You won't be like, unless there's a huge breakthrough of the energy storage with the energy density high enough to store the power that's generated by renewable power, then it's going to be like a lot of power that actually going into like wasted or not being able to like deliver to the places that most need it for it. So one thing that we have been looking at in the past 2 years is about hydrogen, because if you're looking at the energy density, hydrogen definitely is something that definitely stand out in terms of the volumetric specific energy. In the like specific energy for the mass, but then for the volumetric specific energy, if you apply pressure, right? So liquid hydrogen is actually really competitive. So like for this year, we're refreshing our investment thesis for hydrogen. And then I'm really happy to say that last year we have invested 2-3 companies in the hydrogen space, from like all the way from the production, like the proton exchange membrane startup, all the way to like the applications of hydrogen, right? So we have invested in Zero Avia, which is using hydrogen as a fuel for the powertrain, and basically powering aviation. I know that is a interesting topic for both Arne and Dragos. So so this is something that I'm super passionate about, and then looking forward to some more interesting startups in the space. And if any audience in the space have like interesting ideas or potentially partners, definitely like to reach out.
Okay, then to maybe chime in for the aviation industry. So again, I always love to start with some numbers. So our industry is expected to double every 15 years. Well, minus a little hiccup we currently have as a pandemic. And it means from currently about 4 billion passengers, we plan to just to go to 8 billion passengers, and that's about the world population. So it's really, really big numbers. And so in scaling this industry, where are the two main topics that we see as Airbus where we need to have a solution that we focus on? Is one is what's the environmental impact of air travel. So we want to lead the decarbonization of our sector. And then the second is scaling to fit the needs of globalization, urbanization, and increasing world population. So the future proofing of the industry. So to speak to the first part, the environmental impact. So air transport as a whole represents about 2% of the human-induced greenhouse gas emission. And that's about 12% of the transportation sector emissions. And so if you break that down, flight operations is about 97% of the contribution, and then ground operations 2%, aircraft manufacturing 1%. So it means majority really comes from the flight operation. And that's why we are so focused on both the zero emission technology and then on the autonomous technologies, with having the big potential to improve safety, decrease operating costs, and also the what we call the democratization of travel. So I'm squarely focused on autonomous technologies, even though I love to listen to my colleagues who work on the hydrogen topics to tie into what Phoebe mentioned. So in the it means, really, how can we scale that industry to double in a relatively short time frame of 15 years? And so I'm particularly concerned about the technology aspect of that, so both hardware and software, and how that can contribute to a safe growth of our industry. And with that, I can hand over to Dragos.
Yeah, for me, the parts that are exciting are also somewhere at that intersection, and one is electrification, the other one is autonomy. And specifically, I'm excited that Silicon Valley is finally investing again in silicon. So we're seeing so many startups that in a particular space. I want to narrow down to two areas. And so one is all these AI chips that it can promise a lot more computation, a lot more neural networks for a lot less power. And that plays into two major areas. One is you can now imagine a world where you can have these edge compute devices right behind every camera, right behind every sensor. So you're now going to move into a world of intelligent sensors rather than getting the raw data and then computing it in a central part. And that's going to open up even more opportunities in terms of automation, and not just in the vehicle, but in the manufacturing space, where you have inspection, where you have robotics, you have a lot of areas that they can benefit from machine learning at the edge. On the server side, the reduction in power consumption, translates directly into the impact on climate change. Something like 10% of the world power it's used in servers now, so we can reduce that. We have a tremendous impact. And then the other part I'm excited about is the investment that's now happening in batteries. I think the development in batteries have been very linear for a long time, and we are getting to the point now where we're reaching electric powertrains are reaching parity in terms of cost with internal combustion engine powertrains. But I think the excitement in the space showcased by all the SPACs in new EV companies, showcased by the interest that the public has in electric vehicles, the mandates from governments, that means there's going to be a lot more money going in towards battery technology development, which is going to bring in a lot more minds that maybe have gone into other fields before. And I expect that exponential curve to happen in batteries also in the next few years, and that will have a huge impact both on transportation and in storage at the power plant level.
I just want to say how refreshing it is that I asked you all to tell me something you're excited about, and every single one of you talked about sustainability and climate impact, right? That's awesome. So it's good that those things are top of mind. And I think that as companies, you all have sort of unique positions around sustainability, in the sense that all three of you are massive manufacturers, right, which has a huge environmental footprint. And then you also sell products that have an incredibly large impact on sustainability. So both operationally and from a business perspective, you're just completely tied up in the environment. And I think for years, sustainability was just a tab on a big company's website, right? It was just a PR thing. And I'd like to think, and I do think, that over the past few years, actual investment has gone into it, as opposed to just lip service from all of your companies and a lot of the other large industrial companies in the world. And I think that the pandemic also helped, in the sense that, I've actually been working with Ford and Shell on this. you also started looking at it as a cost avoidance tool, right? How can we reduce energy in our manufacturing footprint? How can we use less water, right? Things like that actually save you money. So, you know, and I want to wrap after this and give the audience some time to ask questions. So it'd be great if people want to start firing off some questions, and we'll jump to Q&A in a minute. I just want to ask at the end, how do you see sustainability as either an operational efficiency tool or as a revenue generator? I know those are big picture ways of looking at it, but I'd be interested just to hear what you think about that, if anybody wants to jump on those.
Maybe I can share something just because we just had our like strategy day for the whole corporation in February 11th. So if you go to our website, like investor relations, you will be able to see like the deck, right? But then the main change that we have seen before is if you're thinking about the oil majors, right? You have like an upstream, downstream, and midstream, and then that's kind of how you organize your company. But then in the past decades that we have seen, especially like in the past 2-3 years, to be more specific, because of the pandemic and then also because of the urgency of the climate change, we have seen a more like a sectoral approach, meaning that we're more customer focused, right? So we will be like looking at like aviation, like for example, like as Arne might know a lot better, and then mobility or transportation, as Dragos can elaborate. And then we also have like a marine, we have like a long haul heavy duty transportation, and then et cetera, et cetera. So we are looking at customers, like from the customer's perspective. And then if you're applying that customer focused lens, right, you would know that the customer nowadays, they want to have the overall value proposition to them. And the value proposition is not only like how cheap you can give me the product or how comprehensive that your product can serve my needs, but more importantly, the ESG focus is so important, right? People want to make sure that they understand what is their carbon footprint for the products that I'm purchasing. Especially like now, if you're looking at carbon management, there is like a lot of like different categories of like how to measure that, but you have like 3 scopes. You have scope 1 emission, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is about your direct emission, about your like a daily operations, which like every company are managing. And then your scope 2 is actually your kind of upstream scope or emission, right? The electricity that you purchased or the fuels that you purchased. What are the emissions that those things can like have you for your impact? Because that's your scope 2 emission would actually get into your books. And then the scope 3 is like all the rest of the indirect. It could be your like suppliers and could be your customers. So we are singly focused on like all 3 like scopes, because we understand that for our customers, how we produce that energy, right? How we provide the energy to them, it means a lot to them, because these corporations or these startups, their investors have the ESG requirements, and then the governments that or the jurisdictions that they operate in also have requirements. For example, like China going into the carbon neutrality or announcing that they will be going into carbon neutrality by 2060, and then you have like a governments in Europe and then the US having like different regulations to shape this framework. So yeah, so we definitely see like from the company as a whole, this is a completely like transformation or shift of directions, which as a like a environmentalist in my like early 20s, right? This is definitely something that I'm super happy to see. Yeah, I'm gonna pause there and transfer to Dragos and Arne.
Yeah, so from our point of view, we're looking not only at sustainable materials and materials made out of ocean plastics, materials made out of biodegradable sources. The challenge in the automotive industry is that those materials also need to last something like 10 years. They need to survive UV. So we have a lot of areas that are difficult, particularly if there are surfaces that you see. There are a few more opportunities in areas sort of behind the dash where the looks are maybe less important at times. But we're also looking importantly at second life for batteries. How can you take those batteries and put them in for other uses where they may not need that kind of storage density that we need inside the vehicle? We're looking at the circular economy. So, but you're right, it's a combination of both being good stewards of the environment, but it's now starting to to make business sense to go in that direction because it's starting to make financial sense. So it's a combination of forces that are driving us in that direction. And you're right, ESG is now becoming front page, not some tab somewhere in the on the third page of the report.
Yeah, thanks guys. I think well, I'll let Arne talk in a sec, but I think it's obvious to everyone who's a realist that there won't be advances in sustainability until it makes financial sense. So it's nice to hear that that is starting to happen in your businesses. Arne, what's your take on it?
Well, I'd like to look at the topic at the enormous progress that was done in Dragos industry. So within about 20 years of an effort, this whole topic of electric propulsion, so key technology there, moved from a very researchy topic to a product you can just go to a dealership and buy. And it's surprising how fast that transition to in that considerable better type of propulsion form is possible. And that makes me also very optimistic on the progress in other industries. And as I mentioned, in the aviation industry, the two big topics that we look at is the propulsion as a greenhouse emission kind of emitter, and how we operate our vehicles, and the combination of kind of intelligence in how we operate, how we optimize, and a new propulsion system will be the answer, in my opinion.
So that's great. And just one thing to quickly geek out on. Phoebe, while you were talking, I looked up how many joules were in a liter of gasoline. It's about 31 million joules. I would be interested to see the day when, Shell or any company can calculate how many joules it took to produce a liter of gasoline that has 31 million joules in it. So just the efficiency of doing that. I know do you guys do that?
Yeah, actually, it's like, in a sense, it's your energy input, right, and then energy output. So yeah, that is definitely something that would be very important for us to as a measure to gauge what are the kind of energy input into the eventually the energy storage or the fuels that we get out. So that's actually one of the criteria is that when I look at hydrogen, right? So how much energy input that you need to put in to get your 1 kg or 1 ton of hydrogen. So that's there are a lot of debates about whether you should do using electrolysis to produce hydrogen or green hydrogen, or you should do pyrolysis, which is in terms of your energy input would be a lot lower, but then how to make sure that your output doesn't have carbon dioxide. So it's always a kind of a trade-off, and then it's a boundary that you especially under this current environmental issues, it's important. You don't want to have a fuel that you actually have a lot more energy input to go in there. So yeah, so you're spot on, Isaac. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, happy to hear that that's how you see the world. So I want to make some time to answer questions from the audience. We got about 15 minutes left. Okay, somebody just popped a question in here that I love, which is, what would you recommend to another organization looking to make a shift to digital focus with regards to people and culture? I think we talk a lot about technology, right? How do I get data from stuff? How do I electrify things? How do I introduce AI? And it's probably, honestly, it's more of a people and culture question. So, I'd be interested to hear what advice any of you would have about how do you do this from a people and culture and change management perspective?
I can jump in. So I happen to kind of lead the our task force for diversity and inclusion, and I'll go into that angle about kind of the digitalization and culture side. So we all know that venture capital is a very historically it's not a very diverse environment, right? Especially 10 years ago when I first joined the industry. So so we see a lot of momentum behind it, but I want to kind of just single focus on like right now we are actually using platform or digital platform to start tracking diversity and inclusion. And then a lot of those are very interesting. Like you do like a survey every quarter, and then you would actually see the survey would be anonymous, but you would get aggregated data, and then about like how people starting at the same position, how they kind of change in terms of a career progression, and then how they change about the like pay, like equality, right? So a lot of this are now like definitely like changing towards the digital platform, because it's a lot easier for you to do like a data analysis, and then even like applying machine learning to prompt the right questions to ask. So I definitely say that the digitalization is a mean to power a lot of different changes. And then one of the case study is, just as I mentioned, the diversity and inclusion. Yeah.
I think it's important to highlight to people that the benefits they get from this. So yes, there are clearly some disadvantages in working remotely and being a face on the screen, but from personal experience, when the entire team, all my peers are actually based in Michigan. Before this, I had to either fly in, or I was at this disadvantage because I was on a screen and everyone else was in a room. And now with this pandemic, everyone is on the screen. So all of a sudden we're on a level playing field. So it's a clear advantage for me, but that also educates others into, this is the benefits. You don't always have to be there in person. You don't always have to be, touching things. And it makes things a lot more efficient in a lot of cases, where it's a lot easier to just jump on a video call rather than having to drive across town or across the country. And I think it's important to highlight to people on a very personal level what those benefits are, and make sure that those are then passed on to their teams, that they in turn accept this new way of working. I still think that work in person is necessary, particularly when you start a new project, when you have a new team. That those new team dynamics those I think are the hardest thing to do remotely. But once you get the project going, once the team dynamics are established, it is almost a lot easier to do it remotely. And I know plenty of other companies that work a lot with hardware, and that would be probably the hardest thing to do remotely. We have now the technology to leave the hardware in some lab and access it via an IP node. You don't have to be there in person to physically touch it. So I think between the tremendous changes in technology and the benefits that come with it that you may not have realized before, you may not have been forced to think how to do this remotely, I think it has opened up a lot of areas for collaboration, and even doing testing on hardware in a very different way than before.
I can totally echo what Dragos mentioned. The moving this current work mode, work from home, work remotely, kind of forced us to just a different interaction model, and almost surprising. It works, and it works actually quite well for some or a lot of topics, particularly any of those related to software. But maybe to step back a little bit, the aviation industry is also in industry on the move. So it's traditionally, it was very much a hardware focus, a manufacturing focus, and then the amount of software to the overall value generation is ever increasing. So we basically moved to a combined hardware software company in essence. And so that means we have to have different development processes, we have to have different decision processes, and basically have to find this hybrid between hardware manufacturing focus and a software company. So it means there's also a lot of just internal education, fostering awareness in the company we do, and to make sure that everyone understands, what are the opportunities that this new things like AI, machine learning, digital technologies bring, and the potential can have, and how we can use it, and how we can integrate it in our overall decision processes. And that's an interesting time. But in general, it's in our industry, we probably have the advantage. It's not a question anymore. It's reality that most people understand and want to make happen. All right.
Yeah. No, thanks, guys. Dragos, one of the things that you made me think of is I agree with you that remote work on hardware is inherently difficult. One of the categories that we saw really accelerated by the pandemic was augmented reality tools, right? Now that people can't travel to fix stuff or install things or troubleshoot issues with hardware and equipment, that was a category that a lot of people weren't interested in a year or two ago and didn't see the value in. And tons of industrial companies rolled those tools out at scale right at the beginning of the pandemic. Just the ability to point your phone at a piece of equipment or a piece of hardware and have a remote expert work with you on it. That was hugely accelerated by the pandemic. So there's one other question I want to get to before the end. I think this is an interesting question, and then we'll wrap. This was submitted in the Q&A. It was just the idea that insurance companies incentivize people to live their lives healthier, and then they get incentives for doing that, right? Because it'll reduce their claims theoretically. Have any of your organizations taken measures to incentivize innovation for your teams?
Well, I think the biggest incentive you can give people is the freedom to be innovative. I think I would almost flip things and put it the other way around, is that I think over processing, putting too many processes in place is what kills innovation. It's one of the first things I fought for when we opened the lab in Palo Alto is giving people the freedom to look for things. I'm like, look, you set us up in Palo Alto, we're far away from the mothership. You can't tell us 100% of the time what to do, because then there's no reason to be in Palo Alto. We need to have that freedom. Yes, there is the push, the pull from the headquarters, where you tell us the direction we had to head in, and we're filling those gaps. But there also needs to be the push where we find new things and we push them to the headquarters. And that freedom, that liberty of that, to be creative, I think that's absolutely critical. And to be honest, it was a difficult discussion in the beginning, because it's, how do I prove it? You give me this freedom, what am I going to do with it? I'm like, I don't know. You'll see, it's going to be good, because literally that's the whole point of having that freedom. You don't know how you're going to fill those gaps. And to be honest, there were some difficult discussions in the beginning. Now we can point down to explicit, projects and achievements that we've had that only could have been generated from that different mentality coming in from the Valley. And again, it's that interaction between looking at things from a different angle with an understanding of where they eventually have to fit in. We're not working on wacky things. We're working on things that are new, but they fit in the major mandate that the company has. The funny thing is, and hopefully this is a segue for Arne, one of my arguments, and keep in mind that was 6 years ago, I'm like, look, I know what the company needs. Even if you give us freedom, we're going to work on things that are relevant. I'm not going to work on flying cars, for crying out loud. Well, guess what? Exactly. Within a couple of years, we were looking at flying cars, because we have a lot in common to share. We have, from batteries to autonomy to lightweight materials to propulsion systems. It's just they have 3D and we have 2D. So you never say no to wacky ideas, because they might become something that becomes really relevant.
Thanks, Dragos. I would say with incentivization, the best incentivization is for many people, including myself, that we work in an industry that has a rapid progress. Basically, each product that we have is substantial better in almost any parameters than the previous ones, and it's safer, it's more energy efficient, etc. It's just more pleasant to use for the consumer, and that for me is the biggest incentive. And then just extrapolating what the next generation of product is, what we can do, and then also this opportunity that we built on a product that basically impacts the entire world population, that our industry is to fly 8 billion passengers, basically the global population worldwide in the next 15 years. That's tremendous growth. That's, there's no better incentives than that.
Yeah, I would agree with Dragos and Arne 100%, right? You really need to have a simplified internal processes and then really incentivize innovations and make sure that you have the broader picture about external, so that you would know that the innovations, the creativity within your organization is really, really important. If there's one thing that I could add to the conversation about incentivizing innovation, is about people, because I think a lot of people in the audience actually have interested in like the people, the culture, right? So really hire the top-notch employees or talents into your organization, because like if you plug in a very creative person and a group of folks that are like a very like routine or process driven, you won't get anything. But then if you have a team, or if you have a good percentage of your workforce that are like innovative, that are creative, and then also like represent well from your customer base, right? Then that's where the innovation will start. And then there's actually one thing that we did internally is trying to have a natural way of forming a team. So obviously you have the organization kind of line manager and the lines that you go up to, but then we are trying to have more and more like a cross-pollination and cross-line of businesses collaboration. So if these are like a team naturally being formed to solve a problem or create a project, so the leadership is super supportive on that. So that's one thing that I enjoy doing in Shell, and then definitely see that bringing some creativity and innovation to the organization. Yeah, back over to you, Isaac.
That's perfect. That was a great way to close it, and we were about a minute ahead of schedule, so I think it's probably time to wrap. I want to thank our panelists today for a really insightful and fun discussion. I want to thank the attendees who spent some time with us. If anybody would be interested in connecting with me or any of the panelists, just feel free to shoot us a note and we can try to make it happen. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and we appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much.